Well, good afternoon. It's great to see a full house. Thank you all for coming. So welcome to today's panel, Classrooms and Case Studies, VR in Education. Over the past couple of years, Oculus has been collaborating with researchers and educators to understand just how VR can have a positive impact on learning. And we've been extremely fortunate to work with truly cutting-edge teams who are developing new immersive experiences and exploring how these experiences can transform the classroom. We're honored to have several of these education pioneers here with us today to share their work. And whether you're already using VR in the classroom or just thinking about maybe trying it, I hope today you'll be inspired by just the variety of different things this group of people has tried and learned from, and hope you can take away today. My name is Cindy Ball. I lead the Oculus education programs at Facebook. So I'd like to introduce our speakers today. First, we have Dr. Renata Fruchter. Renata is the founding director of the ProjectBased Learning Lab in the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department at Stanford University. Renata will share her experience with VR in her extremely unique and innovative global teamwork course that she teaches with university partners worldwide. Welcome, Renata. And next we have, oh yeah, she's the real deal. Next we have Dan Roy. Dan is a research scientist and lead game designer at MIT Education Arcade. Dan and his team have developed a collaborative VR game for learning about human cell biology by diagnosing genetic diseases. Welcome, Dan.
Thanks.
And next is Laura McGinty. Laura is a biology teacher at Ballard High School at Seattle Public Schools. She has 6 years of teaching experience in both middle and high schools. She works closely with her colleagues to support and engage students in new, effective ways of learning. And Laura has added VR to her classroom for the very first time last year. And so she has a lot of things to share with us. Welcome, Laura. And our final panelist is Hassan Karoni. He manages Facebook's EdMod Labs unit, which is committed to modernizing educational experiences. And we'll learn more what that means. He's been co-designing with communities and applying new opportunities to the spaces of education and technology. And Hassan and his team have implemented VR pilots and programs in collaboration with many different schools, educators, and learners over the past 3 years. So welcome all of you. Before we jump into the conversation part of this session, I'm inviting each of our panelists to give a brief overview of their work so we can set some context for who they are and what they're doing. All right, we'll start with Renata.
Hello again, Renata Fruchter from the PBL lab at Stanford University. That is the home of a project-based learning global teamwork course I've been teaching for the past 20 plus years together with university and industry partners worldwide. Our mission is to educate the next generation workforce, to team up with professionals from other disciplines, take advantage of cutting and bleeding edge technologies like VR to design sustainable built environments. So to accomplish this, we bring together graduate students, faculty, and industry mentors from 5 disciplines: architecture, engineering, construction management, life cycle financial management. And the students work in cross-disciplinary, globally distributed teams to remotely design and build virtual solutions to university buildings in challenging scenarios like earthquake zones, hurricane zones, flooding zones. And it's important to remember that architects, engineers, and builders think, design, and build in 3D. So VR is a perfect fit. Thanks to Oculus support, we have really defined some challenging objectives that try to reimagine collaboration technologies in VR to support global teams. And for us, it's important to replicate. So formalizing transformative impacts of novel VR interaction experiences are important to understand how they impact the individual learner, the team dynamics, as well as the product, the virtual building that they design and build, and the emergent work processes that they develop using VR. So here is a very quick example of deep learning and inquiry as VR allows them to ask questions and explore solutions together as they co-create, looking at scenarios that are impossible, they are hazardous, they are costly in the real world, but in the virtual world, they can solve situations like you see here, construction site logistics, identifying bottlenecks that impact all disciplines. So lots of findings and exciting results that VR facilitated.
Thank you, Renata. Dan.
Hi, I'm Dan Roy. I'm a research scientist and lead game designer with the MIT Education Arcade. And Renata was talking about collaboration. That's a perfect segue into collaborative learning in VR, which is a project that we're doing to teach high school cell biology in a new way, in an immersive way. So cue the video. So we've put players inside a cell. They are diagnosing a real genetic disorder. This is cystic fibrosis. And they're looking for clues throughout the cell. So it's an exploratory process. It's inquiry learning, discovery learning. We're training scientific thinking. We're training comfort with not knowing the answer first from the beginning. And then what you're seeing here is a single player lead-in to the collaborative aspect. As I mentioned, we have two players working together, cross-platform, in and out of VR. So what you're seeing here is what we call the Explorer view. They're in VR in a headset. This is a Rift S. And we also have a player outside of VR on a tablet. They have complementary views. It's asymmetric, different information, different tools and abilities. The person outside VR can operate the microscope, has different reference abilities, and they work together to solve the problem. So here the player is exploring in VR, looking for clues, symptoms, evidence. They can click on something, take a sample, and then they move on to diagnosis, where they look at their evidence inventory, say, here's what I collected and what it means. So here we are taking a sample. You make a diagnosis, which class of disease do you think it is, and then move on to selecting a treatment. So it's very hands-on. The students in the high schools we've tested with love it, and look forward to talking more about it.
Great. Thank you, Dan. Okay, next, Laura.
Hi, my name is Laura McGinty, and as an educator, I'm boots on the ground education, right? I teach freshman biology right now, and I want that. My job is to provide engaging content that is accessible for all of my students, every student that walks through my door. So every year I go through a reflecting process where I determine what to cultivate and what to cull, and then I research what's available out there. Last year I was introduced to virtual reality as a tool to use in the curriculum, and so there's not a lot out there to find. It's really difficult to find sometimes, so working with an amazing team of people, we were able to build some curriculum aspects, and because of that, we collaborate with other teachers, so we spread it around through the school, through not just the science department, but world languages, the special education department, history as well, English language arts. And because of that spread, we were able to really start impacting the school culture. There was actually a very big shift in the school culture as well. So I'm excited to share some of the details of that later on.
Thank you, Laura. And Hassan.
Thank you. The work that I'll be sharing today is rooted in the work of a team named EdMod Labs that I manage at Facebook as part of the larger education modernization team. And I actually wanted to start by just recognizing my teammates. You see them on the slide here really quickly, but our work wouldn't be possible without them. So that's Ashna Mago, Jay Bornstein, Scotty Wang, Salia Chaudhry, Lydia Evans. We'll get into the points later today about how really doing anything with VR in education takes a village. So it's awesome to have that village here today, and that's what our team looks like. And the work that we're sharing is rooted in our commitment to developing products and programs that we believe can modernize the educational experience and also unlock new opportunities for students and educators. As part of that, we're very committed to VR, and we've been working in the space for a few years now, specifically focused on the questions that you see on the screen, and trying to work with educational communities to understand the potential that they see for those questions. We got started on the first question about 3 years ago. We partnered with the Arkansas Department of Education to roll out Oculus Rifts and related VR programming across around 250 high schools in the state. And as the space evolved, we wanted to expand on that and also get new perspectives. So we expanded our Arkansas partnership and also started working with teachers across California and Washington. So in 2018, we worked more with these teachers and around 600 students to collect their input on the Oculus Go, Gear VR, different experiences and the potential that they saw for those. So we've moved past the second question, but we're also still eager to learn more in that area as we move into the third space. And if you're a developer interested in VR experiences and getting more of your work into the classroom, I would love to talk with you after, because I think we have some great opportunities and partnerships for that. But overall, I'm really excited about the group that we have here today and eager to see where the conversation takes us.
Great, thank you, Hassan. Okay, well, let's start talking. We have a lot to talk about. So I want to start with one of the first things people often ask me when they know I'm working with education in VR is, well, how are they using VR in the classroom? Like, what are they doing with it? What's happening? And so I know, Laura, over the past year, the Seattle Public Schools have explored a lot of different use cases, and I wonder if you could share some of your favorites with us today.
Oh, there are so many. The first one that comes to mind was not actually the very first one, which was a really amazing moment. That was the moment where we're like, this is going to be big. But it was actually the moment where I saw a child, a student, a 15-year-old, change his mind about climate change. Not that it wasn't real. He knew that it was something it's a thing. But he pulled the headset off from the experience, and the first thing he said was like, I had no idea. Those poor penguins. So we created, in that moment, we created a connection via empathy, right? So through climate change, he understood the science. His test scores showed that he got the concepts down just fine. But what was really exciting, what was really powerful, was the connection, the personal, emotional connection to the science that we were looking at in the classroom. The biggest question in high school, why does this matter? And so that was one of them. And then the opportunity to be able to share these things with other content areas outside of science. The world language has just blown my mind in what they've been able to do, taking entire classes to Spain or to go visit the dumps in Guatemala as a part of a cultural experience, to talk with each other, to experience traveling while Black in the English language department. Special education has done some, the word is beautiful. I mean, just some beautiful things in the special education department that has allowed students who have social emotional learning disabilities to be able to have a moment in VR and be able to contain themselves and regain composure and then get back to class. And they've found that students have actually been able to get back to class sooner and more often with the use of VR than there ever has been in the past, to name a few.
Great, thank you. A lot of great stories there. Talk to Laura later. Great stories. Hassan, you've also spent a lot of time in classrooms, so what are some of the use cases that you've seen that have been most impactful?
Yeah, well, the ones that I would want to highlight in really thinking about the educator and also the developer's perspective is that the most impactful ones have been the ones that are highly interactive. So if there are experiences where people can jump in and it's not just passive, it's more visual or it's more interactive and you can actually play with the environment, influence your surroundings, those are very critical, and just the engagement goes through the roof with those as opposed to more passive experiences. Students might try them once or twice and then it tapers off. So I think there's a huge opportunity there to just focus on more interactive experiences and also anything that's asymmetric, where students in the headset can be interacting with students outside of the headset. A lot of teachers have brought that up, and students even see the potential for that. But I think there's a dearth of experiences currently that support that type of interaction.
Thank you. Renata, your class has really, you had a chance to talk about it a bit at the intro, but VR has really made some major transformations for your class. And I wonder if you can just tell us the story of what happened this year.
Well, a bit of statistics. We successfully deployed VR in 12 university partners worldwide. Everyone was in VR together with me as a mentor and many other coaches. We had 34 students coming from the 5 disciplines representing 15 nationalities, engaging in global teamwork to virtually design and build university buildings, and interacting in the process with more than 60 industry and faculty mentors who were also geographically distributed. Some big aha moments were to see VR really transform cross-disciplinary empathy, going back to Laura's point about empathy in this case, really building an awareness, appreciation, and understanding of different disciplines' perspectives, objectives, constraints, because we were not just present. There was not just a presence, but we were present that helped really build common ground. We all saw the issue. It also bridged culture because many didn't have English as a first language, and it's very hard to communicate your design intents, your mental model, when you don't have the language and fluency. But VR really allowed to communicate design intent. It also transformed the mindset in the sense of embedding VR in their daily work practice and transforming their team process, not only as a team, but also as subgroups, exploring alternatives, 10x exploration, asking questions at a level of complexity that they were not able to explore before VR, to model, simulate, and experience their virtual designs. It was transformative in the sense of agility, fail early and often, explore and understand, and learn how to make joint decisions.
Yeah, I think one of the things that has struck me about your project was how it has transformed the collaboration of these global teams who are distributed across time zones, and yet they've come together. The work that happens in this class is truly mind-blowing, professional projects all the way, and I have trouble imagining how you do that with a professional consulting group that's in the same office, and yet her class does that, distributed around the world. It's truly impressive. Go ahead.
If I may bring up another very interesting question that is also relevant to my colleagues, is who designs the experiences for whom? And on one hand, we see developers, game developers, trainers, who really are able to articulate the objective of the learning and training in VR to augment the experience. On the other hand, what we saw in this global teamwork class is the students themselves, the teams, were the actual creators. And because they were exploring so many alternatives, surprise was always there because their design solutions that they were bringing into VR to troubleshoot and brainstorm and co-create solutions were constantly evolving. So you are always on your toes to see what comes next. And this interplay between who designs for whom is very important to keep in mind. And I'm sure that you have some very interesting insights.
I sure do, depending on whether Cindy asked me that question.
So Dan, how do you think VR could really impact deep learning?
Yeah.
What are some of the advantages and challenges to that?
So I'll talk about that on two levels. The first relates to Renata's point about who's designing for whom.
Yeah.
We've actually done all of the design and development and artwork with a team of students at the university. So it's a learning experience for them as well as for the students who will ultimately experience the program as a player. But in terms of deep learning experiences, so there's as the creator, but then as the player as well, the kinds of representations of cells that students often encounter in schools are highly simplified. They might be a circle, or even if they're 3D on a textbook page, they have one or two of each organelle. We call these the Whitman samplers, because there's one or two of each. And they come away without the ability to think about how this cell would work. So we wanted to leverage the strengths of VR to give students a highly embodied, visceral sense of the spatial dimensionality of cells, both how big they are, how many things there are in them, how many of each kind, how large each thing is relative to each other, where it's positioned, and whole aspects of cells that are not generally represented in textbook diagrams, such as the cytoskeleton, like all of the stringy stuff that supports the 3D shape. And then having this more detailed, more authentic representation allows students to ask and answer much deeper questions about how does the cell work or how might it not work. So we chose diagnosing and treating a genetic disease because it was a match for high school biology curricula, intro biology, where they're learning about cell processes, including so-called central dogma, which is DNA transcription to RNA, translation to proteins. So this is where all the stuff in the cell comes from. And we figured what better way to learn about how that works than by putting them in a cell where it's not working and asking them to diagnose, debug, maybe for this audience, what's going wrong.
Great, thank you. I think one theme that cuts across all of your work also is collaboration. And Renata, you spoke some of that to your project. Dan, I know you've done a lot of very intentional design around collaboration for your work. Can you share some of that?
Sure. So as Hassan mentioned, this asymmetric, in and out of VR is something that often can be a good fit for classrooms. There may not be one-to-one with devices, or not all the devices have the right affordances. There may also be people who, for a range of reasons, are not able to or don't want to go into VR or don't want to be in VR all the time. Maybe they're comfortable for an hour, but they're not yet comfortable for 8 hours. So thinking about how people can engage with a learning experience sort of regardless of the platform, or have some choices about the platform was critical. But then thinking about what beyond traditional school subjects do students really need to learn to be lifelong learners, to be relevant in the workforce with the skills of tomorrow. So these so-called 21st century skills, of which collaboration, communication, critical thinking, creativity comprise. So we wanted to give players, students, experiences where they could collaborate. Often their initial experience is, gee, collaboration is hard. I don't know how to do that. So in our future work with the project, we'd like to make the game more replayable so they can move beyond that initial, I don't know how to collaborate, to, well, what are some ideas for how to collaborate? How can I improve? Go into it maybe with a hypothesis or a strategy, try it out. We added a non-player character who can be a coach and a role model, asking questions of both players to model what kinds of questions they could ask each other and what types of information they have access to. So we're looking at how to teach collaboration, how to scaffold collaboration through collaborative problem solving.
Great, thank you. And often when I talk about VR in a classroom, people often jump to the assumption that you put all the kids in VR at one time and they experience something together and then they come out. But Laura, shaking her head, yeah. So Laura, can you talk about some of the collaboration models you build in your classroom, some of the different structures you use for utilizing VR in your classrooms?
Yeah, absolutely. That actually, walking into a classroom with every child in a headset is not something that I want to see, because unless they are collaborating with people outside of that classroom and in spaces across space, through continents or through the states or what have you, what I want to see in my classroom is the development of those 21st century skills, as well as attaining content at that time. Taking it from passive learning to that active learning, because a lot of the applications and experiences that we have access to at this moment in time are passive. The app that we use to travel through the cell was very much like a tour, and they sit there for quite a while and they look at all the things. They talk about things that look like churros, which were the cytoskeletons, and they express and explain, and the other person is sitting across the table with a whiteboard and they're drawing out and they're trying to identify with a sheet what they think that person is seeing. And what that does is it gives them an opportunity to clarify description, it clarifies communication, and it gives them that collaborative experience. And then they switch and have a different experience where then I put them in a 360 video, a CGI of a cell, and they describe what they're seeing at that moment in time, and then they compare and contrast what they've looked at. That communication in the lesson plan is absolutely critical to the processing of the content. If they don't have an opportunity to talk about what their experiences are, it's not going to stick nearly as long if they just sat and watched it, because I may as well be up talking at that point in time.
Great.
Can I add in here?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo the sentiment that when we kicked off some of our first collaborations, we were working specifically with Rifts, and we were thinking about, how in the world are we going to get 30 Rifts into a classroom of 30 students where everyone has their own? And as we got more feedback from teachers, to your point, Laura, we learned that one-to-one was not necessarily the ideal. And one science teacher specifically gave us the metaphor of, think about this like a chemistry lab or a physics lab, where one student might be driving the experience, then 2 or 3 others are facilitating, and maybe they're swapping throughout that. So we've seen that across the board too.
Great, thank you. Kind of alluded a little bit, Laura, to the idea of distance learning. And so I'd love to hear some of your perspectives about how you anticipate maybe connecting learners with each other at a distance, learners to mentors. What are some ideas this group has? You are already connecting globally, so you've already done it. But maybe some other thoughts more for other classes or in high school environments.
I think the possibilities could be endless. I mean, they're limited by what we have access to, right? I would love to be able to have a career opportunity where students can get into headsets and actually see what a lab looks like, because not all labs look the same, right? If you're going to go to a pharmaceutical lab or something that is specific to a marine biology lab, for example, or have a student who gets to go out on a vessel that is going to the Antarctic to explore what's happening there. I think that being able to do that, to be able to go to those spaces, one, it will expose them to careers that they didn't even know existed, possibilities that they didn't even know existed. The other thing would be to have the opportunity to get them in VR and have collaborative experiences with scientists who are in the field at that moment. And to be able to see people who look like them and who sound like them, who are working right now to inspire them, and again, see themselves in that space, because that's how we eventually decide our careers, is if we can see ourselves in that space. So those are at least two of the ways that I can think of right now of future possibilities, or talking to professors who do phenomenal things in their classrooms as well. Please,
Can I add?
Yes, please.
The other option is to go in VR to construction sites, very complex construction sites, you know, offshore platforms, you know, or tunneling, and interact with experts and not just appreciate the construction site logistics, but safety issues, equipment, operation, will really prepare them for the real world.
Great. Any other thoughts?
Well, one of the things that I do want to address is that a lot of people often associate field trips with school. There's a cost to field trips, a very literal and a very figurative cost. And it takes a lot to wrangle 150, 160, 200 children to go wherever. And there's also an exclusionary factor. If you want to take a group of students to, say, for example, if you want to go to Maui, and my family can't afford that. But with virtual reality, I can take a group of students to Maui and explore the ecosystem. Or what I did with the climate change unit is I took them to the Moroccan desert, I took them to Greenland, I took them to Antarctica, and to scuba diving in the Crystal Reef, all in a 56-minute class period.
Can I add to the travel challenge when it comes to travel budgets? All the students come to Stanford for a kickoff event in January. Teams are formed and they meet their client and they get their construction site, which is a real university campus. We don't have the budget to fly everyone to the different locations, but thanks to VR, the teams actually have an opportunity to go visit and explore the site conditions and challenges, raising questions coming from the different disciplines and starting to build awareness of the different disciplines' perspective using VR. So they become travelers or travel guides together.
Yep, great.
I
Great
also
example.
want to add that on the point of field trips, we see it so much. I mean, ask a group of educators what are they most excited about, and at least from our experience, field trips are usually at the forefront. And what I'm excited to see in terms of future developments and new use cases would be more interactivity around those. So moving beyond 360 and passive experiences and building ways for students to actually engage with the environments that they're going to and truly feel like they're there. I haven't seen anything that does it in a really awesome way yet, and there are some just constraints to doing that because it requires going all around the world and capturing these different things. But I think once we could do that, that would unlock so much potential.
And we've seen today at the keynote some potential opportunities. We look forward to you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we've touched on it a little earlier in the panel, but the theme of diversity. And so that also can affect the educational space in a variety of ways, from diversity of students, the diversity of content, the voices and skills that are coming together to create VR experiences. How do you think we can improve diversity using VR for educational purposes? How can we improve the educational opportunities for more diverse communities through the use of VR?
Well, if I may on that one, I think one of the most important things is to always make sure that we're moving forward thinking about being able to see ourselves in that situation, and not just myself, but is is what I'm sharing with my students. Can every single student that I have, this year I have 154, can every child see themselves in what I'm demonstrating, what I'm showing? So making sure that the content that I have is representative and accessible to every student. And if not, what do I need to do to make those changes? Who do I need to talk to? What do I need to change in my own practices? And also being very mindful of my own implicit bias, where my blind spots might be because of my privileges that I grew up with and experience today. So just being mindful and then being in touch and collaborating with people who are developing to make sure that we have access to that space and voices. The voices need to be heard from the students, right? What is it that they want? And every year I've become a better teacher because of their responses to my students' responses of what needs to change and what needs to be seen.
Great, thank you. We're done.
One other big challenge as we prepare the next generation workforce for the global markets is an appreciation and empathy towards multicultural teamwork and exposing the students to different ways of communication and interaction. How do you give feedback to different students coming from different cultures is also a challenge for us as mentors and coaches, as well as for the students. So bringing them in these complex, multicultural environments really broadens their horizons tremendously.
Yeah, great, thank you, it's a great point.
Let me just build on that. I think with biology in particular, there's often a disconnect between how it's taught in the classroom and what a biologist would do in their career. One of the things that we're trying to do with Solverse is to reduce that gap. So the experience of playing Solverse, of solving the puzzle of diagnosing a disease is closer to the type of work that a scientist would do. It gives students a sense of what that career path looks like, feels like. Maybe they could identify that that's a fit for them earlier on, whereas if they don't have an experience like that, they might rely more on external cues, like, do the scientists look like me?
Yeah, great. Another topic I wanted to talk with you about is, it's one thing to bring VR to the classroom and give it to the teachers. It's a whole other thing to actually facilitate the logistics and management of these new devices, in your schools. So I would love to hear some of the best practices and policies you put in place over this past year or so to manage that. Yeah.
Well, very clear protocols and consistent enforcement of those protocols. I have 3 rules that students have to follow. The first thing that I introduce is the protection of hardware and software, meaning that if there's anything going wrong with the hardware or the software, they need to report it to me. And it's also that they're pledging that they're going to go to the software that I am directing them to and not head off to something else. The other thing is the protection of other. The protection of other is that if we're partnered up and you're in the VR headset, my job is to protect your space. It is make sure that you are physically safe because your reality is no longer the space in the room, it is what you are virtually in. And it can be incredibly jarring to have somebody come up and poke you, and they do love to do that. So we want to make sure that my job as the person outside of VR, outside of the headset, is to protect you in your space. And then the third point is you have to protect yourself. If you are in VR and you're not used to that or you're prone to motion sickness, I ask students to look out for if they're having trouble with blurriness in vision, if they're having headaches, if they're starting to feel nauseous. 1, take the headset off immediately and stay seated and send their partner to come get me. So those 3 rules: protect the stuff, protect the partner, protect the self.
I totally agree, and an opportunity that I see is on the development side and the software side to just be mindful that when educators and learners are trying this for the first time, it might be the first time that they're using VR at all. And so think about what you can do in the experience, like wizards and guides to drive people through learning how to work with the experience itself, but also packets and guides that are an initial just like thought, like introduction to whatever the experience is, would be really impactful as well. And on the point of people poking you in VR, from the work we've done, the conclusion we reached is that if it's in a classroom, it's going to be a social VR experience. Even if you designed it to be single player, other students are going to interact with that person in the headset. They are going to be self-conscious about the people around them. We've seen weird things like students stealing shoes off of each other's feet, even pretending, one time they were bullying each other by pretending to cut off someone's hair by like making a noise with a scissor. So everything that you're talking about, protecting each other and being upfront about that with the experiences and before going into them is really important for all of us to keep in mind.
Renata?
One other aspect, back to Laura's point, is appreciation of the different psychophysiological states that the students can bring to these VR experiences that they are not aware of, and defining protocols, especially going back to motion sickness. Some of the learners and users in general may know that they are the typical person who needs to sit in the front seat in the car. So building protocols and advising the users to, use it for 10 minutes or a particular max time and then toggle between the real world and the virtual world, and in a collaborative setting, organize the agenda so that you focus in VR on a particular issue and then everyone takes off the VR headsets and discusses and moves on to the next topic and has this on-off cycles and rhythms, which have to be explicitly designed and defined for the students and, in general, the users.
Thank you. And I think the last topic I have time for before final questions is around teacher training. And if you're just getting started, you're thinking about bringing VR into your classrooms, what are just a couple of how to get started with teacher training?
Well, what we started with was a team of colleagues. We have Harvey Wright, who was speaking earlier, who came in and helped. Tuesday Chambers, the librarian at our school, has been phenomenal in this process, and Mr. Vaheg is also here working with our other colleagues. And we had a situation where we actually allowed everybody to go and experience VR. And some teachers were like, this is definitely for me, and there were others who were like, no. And to be able to educate them on how to use the tools, just in the same way we did when we brought laptops into the classroom, when we brought iPads into the classroom, or computers, or whatever technology we had, and train them so that they can then adequately and appropriately train their students. And oftentimes the students are more well-trained, and they can help out too. So finding your leaders in the classroom as well.
Great. Anyone else have a comment on that? All right, well, we are actually down to kind of the end of the session, but I want to give each of you an opportunity to leave a final thought with the audience today. Go ahead, Renata.
Well, VR is picking up, and for VR to be successfully deployed and adopted, it's very important to see how VR is embedded in the daily learning and work practice and integrated into the collaboration ecosystem of schools or corporations.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Dan?
I might recommend to all the teachers in the audience, think about how you can set your students free to explore where you're maybe not the expert, you're the coach or the mentor or the resource. Not everything has to be lockstep. Not everything has to be, all right, all my students start the video right now, end the video right now. Think about how there can be a diversity of learning trajectories and the role of teaching can change.
Thank you. Laura?
I'll keep it short. Collaborate, listen, research, and persist.
Awesome. Hassan.
Yeah, so I think we have a really awesome opportunity to put learners first here with where history is, technology, VR, and I hope we can come together around capitalizing on that, giving them access to this technology, and then seeing what that does really in the rest of their educational journey, realizing that they had access to this early and that they get to see these things first rather than having to wait years from now before we get this into classrooms.
Great, thank you. We are at time. Thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you for being here. Our panelists will be in the speaker pavilion starting at 3:15 today. They're going to be in the room here for our next follow-up panel. Thank you.